Hello! Okay, for those of you returning to the channel, welcome back, and for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, then thank you for joining me, and welcome to my spoiler-filled review of Alien Earth Episode 8, The Real Monsters, and just my overall thoughts and feelings on this season 1 of Alien Earth as a whole. And Real Monsters, the title of episode 8, kind of really sums up this show for me. You know, it is what Alien Earth was this kind of deep dive and exploration into very real human themes, using the Xenomorph as this vessel and catalyst to explore those themes in a way that I felt like, at times, really elevated and heightened the horror. And I say at times because it does work for the most part until it doesn't, and I will get to that in the review. But for the most part, I feel like this show, Noah Hawley, was very successful at bringing to life a story with characters that I found incredibly compelling, that I could get behind emotionally, even though a majority of these characters are flawed and make decisions that kind of really question how you feel towards them. You know, the show challenges you in a way that I felt like a story like this should. You know, for me, the show was a blend of classic sci-fi concepts and modern speculative ideas and philosophical themes. And I just felt like Noah Hawley was really successful at exploring these ideas, exploring these themes by using the Xenomorph simply as this catalyst, as this vessel, you could say, for us to really sort of do a deep dive into what it means, you know, to be human and what we are capable of as humans. You know, for example, you know, the show explores themes around trauma, grief, loss, power and control, identity, you know, one questioning their existence and all of that. And I feel like it's done in a very clever and smart way. And it's the writing and sort of that approach to telling this story within the Alien universe that kind of really sort of just catapulted me in, that just sucked me into this world. It immersed me into this story. And, you know, I'm a massive Alien fanboy. I love the Alien movies. I absolutely adore them. I grew up with the franchise. I was watching the Alien movies at an age that I shouldn't be. And yes, I want the Xenomorph front and center. He is the star of the story, the beast. But if you do just go into this show purely just really wanting that, to sort of really sort of wanting that kind of the horror and the dread of the Xenomorph that we are used to from those original movies like Alien 79 and James Cameron's Aliens and David Fincher's Alien 3, then you're going to be somewhat disappointed or massively disappointed, depending on how you felt towards the show and its story and what Noah Hawley was sort of crafting here and bringing to life. But I just couldn't help with Alien Earth but really admire and appreciate this new, fresh, original take with characters and themes that I just found incredibly compelling. And as a result of what Noah Hawley was attempting here, for the most part, the sort of how the Xenomorph played a role within this story really didn't affect me that much. Like, because I just felt like it was clever, it was working, and I really appreciated the originality behind what Noah Hawley was attempting to do here. Like, he created characters, he wrote characters that I just found very interesting, very intriguing, that had layers, that had depth, and they're all brought to life beautifully by all of the performances from all of the cast in this show. Like, I found myself liking characters that are quite morally corrupt and have fractures. You know, they are flawed characters that have problems and, you know, will make decisions that do raise eyebrows and are sort of morally wrong, you could say. But at the same time, you can't help but be captivated by their stories and their journeys because of these layers, because of the depth. Moro is a great example there. I absolutely love what they did with Moro. I love how the character was brought to life. Babu Sisay plays Moro. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly there. But he is amazing in this show. I absolutely adored his performance. Same for Timothy Olyphant as Kirsch. He is absolutely phenomenal in this show. So I've already hinted at perhaps issues that I had with this show because, I mentioned that the horror works, with the Xenomorph for the most part. And that is, I was loving this show right up until episode 6. And then episode 7 came along, and for me personally, it was the weakest chapter. It was the weakest episode in this season. I didn't hate it, but I had issues with it. And then those issues kind of sort of continued on sort of within episode 8. And again, I didn't hate episode 8. I liked it a hell of a lot more than episode 7. But it was more of a mixed bag for me. It's... And I know episode 8, it has a lot to achieve. This is the final within season 1. It's the final part of this story. And there's a lot that there's a lot that I did like in episode 8. But also, as an episode and sort of as a conclusion to this story, it was, for me personally, just a little bit clunky in its execution. And my major gripe, especially with episode 8, and it was the concern that I had, going in and coming from episode 7, was sort of the horror around the Xenomorph itself. And I felt like what they'd been doing with the Xenomorph up until episode 6 was wonderful. It was great. But I was a little bit worried about maybe sort of that relationship and the connection between Wendy and the Xenomorph. But I thought, if handled right, like many other aspects in this show, if handled right, with its execution, then it could work. And I wouldn't say that it didn't work. As a story overall, it is somewhat satisfying. I didn't hate or massively dislike the conclusion to this story. It made sense. The character, the journey that these characters are on, it is somewhat satisfying. Because I can't help but not like these characters. I love the hybrids. I love the Lost Boys. I love Wendy. And just sort of where they find themselves at the end of episode 8, where... And I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here now, because seeing as I'm on sort of that kind of where these characters are at, during the conclusion. Because it's like roles reversed, where now, with Boy Cavalier, Kirsch, they are sort of within the cage, and the hybrids are in control. And I really loved how that kind of plays out, that entire moment. But just from a visual perspective as well, I couldn't help but not see this cage as Wendy's lair. She's the queen. And in many ways, it's quite poetic in how it ends, in how this part of the story ends, how this story concludes with where Wendy and the hybrids find themselves, the Lost Boys, and where Boy Cavalier, Morrow, Kirsch, where they all find themselves trapped within this cage. It is very poetic. I really like that aspect of how the story does conclude. I couldn't help but see from a visual perspective maybe what they were trying to do here. This might just be me, but I could definitely see visually that Wendy and the Lost Boys were kind of representing this kind of the new monster, you could say. Wendy being the queen and this cage being her lair, and you've got Kirsch, Morrow, Boy Cavalier, they're all cocooned within her lair. In many ways kind of like a representation of what the queen is, with the aliens. And I kind of really like that. That might just be me looking too much into it, but I just couldn't help see this entire set piece, with the cage and then with Wendy looking in. And I was like, yeah, she is the kind of the new queen here, the new Queen Xenomorph in many ways, you could say. And again, I liked how the alien, the Xenomorph, plays into this, how it plays into Wendy's story. Though, going back to what I said earlier about it working to a point, or working for the most part, it's in the final 2 episodes, especially the final episode, where I'm not entirely sure how I felt about it. Having this domesticated alien, you could say. And I don't mind the sort of the communication aspect and sort of having this kind of this hybrid, this synthetic with a human consciousness communicating with the xenomorph. That element of the story for me works, but it's just how the xenomorph is used, how it's sort of commanded really by Wendy, and just the role it plays within episode 8 didn't 100% stick for me. It didn't 100% work for me, and I found it just a little bit frustrating because I have enjoyed so much of this show. You know, I have really liked Alien Earth, which I wasn't expecting to. I was one of those fans that as soon as it was announced and, you know, the premise of the show and what they were going to be exploring, I was very much on the fence. I wasn't sure if it was going to work or really be for me, and I ended up admiring it, like falling in love with it. And then I feel like the final 2 episodes for me kind of really pushed me more into the territory of, yes, I really like what Noah Hawley is doing here. I admire what Noah Hawley is doing here, and I've had a really good fucking time with it. At the same time, I'm not quite sure about certain elements of its story and how they eventually do end up using the xenomorph. Some people might find that petty, but I am reviewing this show through the perspective of someone who loves good storytelling, very clever and smart storytelling with original ideas and characters. But I'm also a very big Alien fanboy, and I'm not just going to push the Alien fanboy to one side and just sort of focus on that one element. I'm going to take an array of the feelings and emotions that I've had towards this show, and I'm going to be very honest with you all about how I felt. And I do still love this show. I do still love what Noah Hawley was doing. But going into that final, and with season 1 now wrapped up, I'm definitely more sort of conflicted and mixed about how I feel towards certain elements of it. Not enough for me to completely hate it, or sort of, you know, for it to have, it's not enough for me to sort of just disregard it and say, oh, you know, it's an absolute failure or anything like that, because it wasn't. Like, I was still to a degree satisfied because of everything that was working for me for the most part of the show. You know, the story of the hybrids, the story of Boy Cavalier and Morrow, and the mystery around Kirsch and just sort of Yutani's role in the story, and how it was all sort of brought together. I really admired all of those different elements, but there were little things that Alien fanboy inside of me was like, oh, I think that could have been done perhaps a little bit differently. It was absolutely clever to use the xenomorph in the way that they did throughout this story, by sort of using it as a catalyst for us to really explore those very real human themes, and it did. It would heighten the horror, but I just felt like how the xenomorph was sort of used and portrayed, and how it came to life in that final episode, it kind of lost that presence. It kind of lost the horror that I really wanted, you know. And what we did get throughout almost this entire show, I mean, even episode 5, where a lot of fans were kind of very divided on it, I loved what Noah Hawley did with episode 5 and how he brought the xenomorph to life within that episode. And I just felt like we lost that in episode 7 and 8, especially 8. And a lot of it, I feel like, is down to just how how the episode was constructed, how it was edited. It was very clunky, and you sort of get the sign of that clunkiness right from the bat with the first sort of the opening seconds and minutes into that episode. And it was a little bit jarring, sort of, you know, to get into. You know, you get glimpses into the carnage that the xenomorph is causing on the island, but it just felt overall as an episode kind of very clunky in its execution and in its sort of wrapping up this story, which again at the same time, yes, I left a smile on my face, but also very conflicted as well. Like, I really think they needed to pull back or pull away from the xenomorph being as maybe as under the control or under the thumb, you could say, of Wendy. Because for me, it's the sort of that perception or the portrayal of the xenomorph within this episode, especially with it on the cage at the end. Like, I get it, it's playing into what I'm seeing visually here play out. It is in many ways a representation of sort of, her being the kind of the new leader, of these creatures, of the hybrid. She is the queen and this is her hive. And I loved it, but it was, for me, it just kind of, again, and this is where the fanboy is playing into it, it's somewhat taken away from the sort of the horror and the kind of the unpredictability of the xenomorph and what kind of really makes the xenomorph terrifying. And I feel like, going into season 2, if we do get a season 2, we're in danger of really losing that if not handled right. And it's already kind of faltering, I feel like. But yeah, am I being petty here with those minor gripes that I have? Let me know below. Do you agree or disagree with me? Let me know. And there are moments that, again, I did like within this episode, like seeing the carnage that the xenomorph is inflicting upon the island. I mean, there's definitely a lot of inspiration. I mean, there's obviously, inspiration from especially those first 3 movies. But I saw so much of Alien 3 within this show, from a visual perspective to how the alien sort of comes to life, and sort of the sound, the music, the score. There's a lot of Alien 3 within this show, which I've got no problem with, because, for those of you that don't know, I'm a big fan and supporter of that third movie. Even with all its flaws and its problems, I really admire that film for many different reasons. And, there's a certain shot in the episode towards the end where it's dragging one of the Prodigy troops sort of down into a corridor, and then you've got this single shot of sort of the xenomorph there, and you've got that kind of orange hue, that orange light behind the xenomorph, and it's a great shot. I absolutely loved it. But again, just how that moment played out, even with sort of how the music was positioned and sort of the actual piece of music that is positioned over that moment, it all just kind of felt a little awkward and clunky. And in many ways, and this could be just really sort of speculating now and just looking maybe too much into it, and I could be completely off the scent here, but I sensed that potentially this may not have originally been the original conclusion or idea in how to wrap this part of the story up. I don't know. There was just something about it and how it all came together, and how all of the sort of the pieces on the, sort of the chessboard, you could say, how they all sort of played out and came together within this final episode. They didn't quite feel as organic as it could have, maybe, but that could just be me. I don't know. That's just how it felt overall. And when it just comes to the final couple of episodes and just sort of that transition with Wendy, sort of wanting to be with Boy Cavalier, admiring Boy Cavalier, to then all of a sudden, rallying up the Lost Boys and fighting against them. That entire journey didn't quite feel as natural as it could have been, or as organic. And I mentioned that in my previous review, and I think that was kind of one of the major issues that I had with how this part of the story, how season 1 wraps up. And it is the journey of Wendy and how it kind of, yes, there's mechanisms there, like with Nibs, for example, who, by the way, again, another character that I absolutely loved within this story, that I thought was brought to life beautifully by Lily Newmark. She does a wonderful job of bringing this character to life, and she has some fucking great moments, by the way, in episode 8. Just that entire transition and sort of how we sort of end up with the Lost Boys and Wendy, getting to that point didn't quite feel as natural or as organic as it could have been. I felt like we needed a few more mechanisms there in place to sort of really kind of experience and witness that downfall in a way, or that journey in a way that did feel earned. And it does feel like that maybe they needed a couple of more episodes to perhaps explore that, because it does end, I feel episode 7 and 8 in many ways feels very sudden And it's what makes me wonder about what the original intentions might have been or what they were. I don't know, because it does have that kind of it does have somewhat of an abruptness to it in how we end. At the same time, there's elements of the story and sort of how these characters sort of find where they find themselves in the story that does work, that does make sense. So yeah, as you could probably tell, very, very conflicted come, the final episode here of season 1 of Alien Earth. I have found myself in a much more sort of conflicted position when it comes to the show as a whole. And so yeah, it's been a bit of a journey for me, Alien Earth, from really not liking the idea of it, being very against the idea of this story being set on Earth before the events of the Ellen Ripley story, and then being completely enamoured and just admiring what Noah Hawley was doing. I mean, even loving this show at times and in moments, and just loving what Noah Hawley was attempting and what he'd managed, and what Noah Hawley had managed to achieve by getting this big old fanboy here of Alien on board with this story. And a lot of that is just because of everything that I've already mentioned about creating this very kind of original story that still feels authentic and still feels like it belongs within the sort of the world of Alien, and using the xenomorph in a very clever way. But I feel like it does slip a little in those final 2 episodes. And we do end up with character arcs that are left open, that are left unfinished. This does, I think, in a way, or I feel in a way, for me anyway, it was satisfying to see where Wendy sort of ends up here, but you've still got a lot of characters, sort of journeys and stories that are left very much open. We do get more insight into Boy Cavalier, and again, this is something that I felt like Noah Hawley is really good at doing here within the show, and that's adding more depth and layers to these characters, where, it changes our perception perhaps slightly on how we feel towards them, maybe, or how we look at them. Like, we find out that Boy Cavalier is quite a tortured individual who comes from quite a traumatic background, and just that entire story with Atom, who we find out, is a synthetic, and how that reveal happens, by the way. It gave me Alien Isolation vibes when you've got Hermit walking into that kind of the room, and sort of Boy Cavalier is telling the story about his upbringing and his past, and then you could kind of just see the shadow or the silhouette of Atom there in the background, and he looked like the Working Joe. That's the actual silhouette there of reminding me of the Working Joe from Alien Isolation, and it brought a massive smile to my face. And that is just something that the show did really well as well, is you'd have those little moments, whether it be visually or the music, the score, that kind of really honoured what has come before in a way that was incredibly clever, because as a result, it gave us not just an original story, but an experience that felt authentic, that felt like it just fitted, and I'm starting to repeat myself now, but started to sort of really kind of fit right into the world of Alien that worked. And it has got me excited and hopeful for the second season. The story ends with there needing to be a second season, and I want to see, the continuation of these characters, and sort of, hopefully, Noah Hawley does have an end game in mind of where he wants to see these characters end up. Morrow is another one of my favourite characters that is very much left open here. I think there's a lot that they were attempting and kind of hinting at with Kirsch that does kind of end abruptly here, that, if this is going to be it, then yeah, it's not really as satisfying, but I'm hopeful that we do sort of get that second season so we can continue sort of with those journeys. I'm loving, I loved what Lily Newmark did with Nibs. I think, her character, it's quite a tragic character, but just how she's being brought to life is just, it's mesmerising to watch, actually. And that's the same for pretty much almost all of the performances within this show. Everyone seems to give a very committed, natural and sort of authentic performance. Like, they're bringing these characters to life in a way that can get me emotionally involved and attached to what is happening, and again in turn challenge me, because you've got characters that do things, that make decisions that kind of go against how or what you would feel is right morally. And I just love that aspect. And there are moments in the show, again going back to the soundtrack here, which by the way I've already pre-ordered. You can now pre-order the vinyl, and I've pre-ordered it because it's one of the aspects or elements of the show that I couldn't help but admire, because I feel like it echoes sort of what's come before in a way that's incredibly smart. It's beautiful in how they do it, but also retain this kind of very original piece of music, original sound. But you've got echoes of what has come before, and there's moments, especially in this episode, for example, where you got Wendy and Hermit, and they walk in on Boy Cavalier as just before she commands the Xenomorph to attack the troops, and it's very alien free. Like, there are so many moments when it comes to the score in this show that are ripped straight from Elliot Goldenfield's score from Alien 3, which I absolutely adore. Also, the fight between Kershaw and Morrow is great. I just love how that scene plays out, and it's a great moment. You could feel the intensity behind these two characters, with the one being, synthetic, and then the other human with synthetic limbs, and so different weaknesses and strengths playing out here in the scene that I feel like is conveyed very effectively. I just really wanted the moment to play out perhaps a little bit longer. And I just love how this entire scene was shot, with the use of the camera and the blood splatter, that lands onto the camera, sort of just kind of really elevating sort of the intensity behind this fight, really, and sort of really feeling the kind of the dynamics between these two different characters, this cyborg and synthetic, and it's just a great moment. So yeah, final thoughts. I think I've rambled on enough now, and I do tend to ramble on and sort of diverge and go on tangents and all of that. I kind of just wanted to really share with you all my general thoughts and feelings on the season as a whole, and where I felt like it did falter, which was in the final 2 episodes, but not enough to completely derail it. Like, I didn't come out to this like Angry Joe, for example, someone who I follow, and Angry Joe is already on his thumbnail have gone epic fail. It's nowhere, for me personally, it's nowhere near being an epic fail. But I do have concerns. I do have issues, especially if it's going to be a second season. At the same time, there are still things that I really liked, that I really admired, and I can't help but appreciate really, what Noah Hawley has done here, because I feel like he achieved a lot here within the show that Ridley Scott failed at with the prequels, as well as Fede Alvarez with Alien Romulus. I mean, I really liked Alien Romulus, and I loved elements of it. But when it came to the characters and their stories, I feel like that's where Fede Alvarez tripped up a little with Romulus. But I feel like here we've got what Ridley Scott was attempting with the prequels, with these kind of very human philosophical themes and sci-fi ideas, and then what Fede Alvarez was attempting by immersing us, especially us, Alien fanboys, back into the world of Alien that feels authentic, that feels real, that where you can feel the horror and the tension. And I think Noah Hawley, for the most part, does a really good job at combining those two different elements. It's not going to be a show for everyone, especially when it comes to the Alien fandom. Like, there's a lot of fans within the Alien fandom, really, that are very divided from what I'm reading on this show. There are some people that have completely disliked it, and there are points that I will agree on, like with how the Xenomorph is utilised within the final couple of episodes, with how kind of domesticated it does get or appear with Wendy. I think we are really in danger there of losing the horror, but there are things that I absolutely admired about it. So yeah, they are my thoughts on Alien Earth, Episode 8 and Season 1 as a whole. And I will be giving Alien Earth Season 1 So yeah, they are my thoughts on season 1 of Alien Earth. Been on a bit of a journey with this show, but what do you guys think? Do you love it? Did you hate it? You know, or were you someone that was 50-50, divided, on the fence about it, even right up until the season's conclusion? Then let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, which by the way, you deserve an award if you have, listening to some random Welsh guy ramble on. But if you have made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie and TV reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please, why not hit that subscribe button? It will mean the absolute world to me. And I just want to say another massive thank you to everyone that is supporting or has supported the channel. It means the world to me. And a massive hello, a big hello to everyone that have subscribed recently. And welcome and thank you for joining me on this journey. I absolutely love doing this, and I've got so many plans for the channel going forward of where I want to, or what I want to do and where I want to go with it. I can't do that without your support, and it will always overwhelm me that so many of you do want to follow just some random Welsh geek rambling on about film and TV. That's it from me for now, guys. Thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be catching you guys soon.